Hi, and welcome to Fawns and Porter's Dream Big Block of the Month featuring Hoffman Fabrics. Isn't this gorgeous? Lovely boutiques, and I love the center panel. We're going to cover all of that. I'm your host, Jenny K. Parks. If you want to know more about me, you can check out my website, jennykquilts.com, or you can see me on YouTube. All right, today we're going to get started with a double windmill block. Now there's several steps, and I have to add a little bit of drama here. Partial seams. But we're going to do it. We're going to do it, and it's going to be fine. And actually, it's going to be a nice skill to add to your set of all the tools of things you already know. So we're going to get started, and I'll show you how we get all the way around. This is our block, the double windmill block. And I like to be able to look at a block and say how stuff is going to go apart. There's a few in this series that I look at and I'm not quite sure how that's all going to fit together. But it's the partial seam in the middle here that makes the magic happen. All right. Let's get started. Slide that off to the side. Okay, when I'm working on these things, well, there's a couple of basics. One is that I use plenty of water and spray starch. My favorite is just this heavy faultless spray starch. That's the one I love. But you can find any kind of one that works better for you. Some people prefer a starch alternative. But the reason that we're doing it is because so much of what we're putting together, especially in these blocks, is bias. We've got bias everywhere. So we want to control what that does, and the starch helps it to work better. And so what I do, my technique for starching, okay, just so you understand this, you get the fabric wet. And so I'll soak it really well. I mean, I mist it with that spray. I'm not messing around there. I mist it and I make sure it's pretty damp, and then I'll spray it with the spray starch. And then you let it dry a little bit. Don't let it dry completely, because starch is more effective when the fabric's a little bit wet and you've heated it when you iron it. So that's what I do, and I'm telling you, it makes it does a fantastic job. In fact, it can make it like, I want it to be, whoops, very stiff for you. See, it doesn't have that usual give and drape that it would have if I hadn't starched it. I want it so starched it's going to walk in from the table. Hi, Jenny, I'm ready to quilt here with you. So that's how I want it to be for this, because you'll have better control. It puts you in control and not the bias, because sometimes it can get crazy. So when I'm putting these blocks together, since these are unfamiliar and they come together in unique ways, I always have the pattern up right by my sewing station so I can continue to refer to it as I go along. Otherwise, I'm just lost. So here I have the image that we're going to start with, and let me give you kind of an idea of how this all goes together. Okay, so let's see. We've got that point there, and I'm going to continue to work around the circle. Oh, no, let's see, that goes there. And this one, your center in there, and continue on, and I'm going to make this one that will fit in right there, and then we'll join it all with partial seams. Exciting. Okay, so I'm going to keep this as my sample out there so we can look at it throughout this process, and just move this over here to the side for right now. All right, so the first section that I want to make, I want to prep the shapes for this. And there's going to be a lot of cutting on the diagonal. So you cut your strip, then you cut it into squares, and then you cut on the diagonal. And just in case you want a little bit of review, I'm going to show you cutting it on the diagonal. I line up my, you can go straight on, but I just tend to, I guess, kind of line it up on the side. I don't know. It's a thing. I don't know why I do that. But I line up my ruler from point to point, corner to corner there. And then just cut, make sure it's really straight. There you go. And that's how you're going to get so many of the pieces in there. Just be aware, a lot of them is going to be cut on the diagonal. Get that over there. Okay. So the first unit that we're going to put together is this part of it. See, I'm gonna put these here. So again, I have it right there in front of me, because otherwise I'm gonna be lost, I'm telling you guys. All right, so I want to put these two together. Now, usually when I have something laid out on my board like this, I'll line them up and I'll take it over to my machine and get it ready to cut. But I'm going to get ready to sew. But I'm going to sew from this end and not from the points, because sometimes the machine could chew up your points, and I want to avoid that, right? Because the triangle, you know, the point is the point. So I want to make sure we keep those. All right, so let me sew this together. All right. And I have to say how thankful I am with this, when you're working with batiks, there's not a right side or a wrong side. So you can turn it around and work with it. And I'll tell you, I have done some projects over this last year or so that have been very directional, clearly a right side and a wrong side. This is a nice, easy break. Nice, enjoyable break for me. All right, let me trim off those threads. Now, this batik is very light colored, and I don't want any shadows coming through behind of the other fabrics that are with it. So my plan throughout this whole quilt has been to press towards the dark. So I would encourage you to do the same, just to keep any shadows from happening, keep anything from peeking out there. So I warm up the seam because the fabric is more agreeable to moving and folding in the direction that you want it to go. And then, very carefully, I'm going to press towards the dark. And if you noticed, when I pressed the first time, I don't know if you can still see it, but I pressed in a little fold accidentally. And you need to make sure that your seams, your pressing is sharp, because these points are going to make a huge difference. And if I'm over just a little bit, right, like if I pressed it and it's over, even that much is going to make a difference. So when you're pressing, press carefully, make sure it's nice and sharp, and if you just can't get it, spray it with water, let it dry out a little bit, and then try it again. And you can get it in the shape and the size that you need. All right, so I'm going to trim off this little dog ear. Don't need that. Get him out of the way. Okay, put this together as we go. Now here I have this one, and we need to add those together. And they both have these points, so I don't have an option of starting on a square corner. I'm going to have to start on points. So whatever, we'll make it work. We'll make it happen. And I'm just going to center those together and then stitch. Now I don't typically pin. Don't really feel like I need to on a lot of this stuff. There'll be some other things that I do pin as we go, but typically don't pin on this. But I like to say, like, you know, driving in a snowstorm, you drive the speed you're comfortable with, pin to your level of comfort. Whatever it is, pin at that place. If you need a lot of pins, that's fine, but gradually, I think, the more you do it, the better you're going to get at it. Beautiful. All right. We're going to continue to press towards the dark. Flip that one over, and we're going to press that way. And I like to pull this up. I'll use the tip of my iron to kind of push stuff back. And think of it as you're trying to persuade the fabric to go in the direction you want. You're not angry with the fabric. Well, you might be. I don't know. Then you probably put it away and try later. But I wouldn't press or do a lot of this when you're angry, because you might get distortions. Instead of triangles and squares, you might get ovals and curves. I mean, not that that's bad, but it's not this design. Okay, I'm going to trim the dog ears off again. Don't need those. Catch that thread. There we go. Okay, now these guys. And this is kind of a funny unit to put together. So laying it out, it's going to go like that. We're kind of continuing our little square space. And you could trim off the edges like this, you know, and use a little triangle trimmer tool, which is a great tool to have. I have come up with a few different ways to do this. So if I'm putting these together, one way that I've done, because I know I'm trying to create a square, is to fold this over and make sure it's lined up here. And then I know, you know, that's lined up here, here, and on that corner. And then I know it's going to be in the right position. Because, I mean, you have these extra corners, you're not, see, look at that. That, I mean, when I first started quilting, something like that would throw me off. What do I do? Where do I start? Where do I go? But if you fold it over like this, that's a great way to do it, to make sure that it's going to work. Another way, folding it in half, like so. Gently make a little crease here. And I'm going to fold the place that I'm going to match them to. And gently make a little crease. And then you should be able to line up those guys together and sew. And if you feel like it was going to shift or anything, you could put a little pin in there, but those creases kind of make them snuggle in. All right, and there's not really a nice corner to start it at, so actually I think I might just start on that corner right there. Now everything is not, I find with these triangles, especially because you're dealing with bias edges, is that you have a little bit of wiggle room. You know, with squares, it just lines up and you really don't have a lot of flexibility or stretchiness to it. But with triangles, if you've gotten something off, you do have a little bit of wiggle room. Try to keep your points as accurate as you can, but, you know, don't panic if it's not just perfect every time. Trim off the thread here. Okay, since pressing towards the dark doesn't matter, we'll continue doing it that way around. So when you have these two that are the same color to go together, it doesn't matter which way you press it, just be consistent in which way you decide. And you know, I like to try different methods with different blocks. So I might do up one block and press them all one way, and then the next time I make that block, press them a different way if I can, and I see what's going to work best for me. What's going to work best. I like to say, you make the method work for you. The method serves you. You don't serve the method. So if something I'm showing you doesn't quite work, that's okay. See if you can find another way to make it work for you. All right. So that's the part there, right? Is it starting to make a little bit more sense? Okay, so now we're going to put these guys together. Piece this together here. Again, because I have a corner to contend with, I'm just going to start over here on this end. And I typically like to stitch whichever is the piece that has the most seams. That's the one I want to have up and looking at, because I want to make sure for matching, I want to figure those things out. If I have the seams on top, I can better match my triangle points and making sure my seams don't flip up. My machine at home sometimes will flip a seam on me. But if I'm doing it from this direction, I can catch it. Okay. Just press this one towards the dark. Oh, wait. Press it towards the dark. This is a time, especially when you're pressing on this, just to take your time. Look at that. That one flipped up on me. I don't want it to flip. I want it to stay flat. Make that go into shape. Now, if I was doing this in different colors, I might press it this way so that I can clearly see that mark. But I'm not going to worry about it this time because I really think that in the overall design, I don't want any shadows coming through from the seam allowances onto this one. I just think for me that would really bother me. I think it would wreck the design for me. You know, you have a quilt, right, and you show it to somebody and you say, it's perfect except for, or maybe next time, and I know we all do that, and it kind of diminishes the quilt and takes the pleasure out of it. But if you figure out what those things are, and you say, oh, okay, I can do it this way next time. And you do it the way you want. So All right, now for partial seams. Okay, this is actually a lot simpler than most quilters think. You think we get intimidated by partial seams, and you don't need to be. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start here. And this is the block we're going to put it onto. And I'm going to stitch to about here and then stop. And if you can make a little knot or a back stitch, do that. You want to kind of secure this. So we're going to make that, and I'm just going partially all the way through, just part of it. All right, so you go about 2/3 of the way down. You want enough security to be able to add to the rest of the pieces, but you also want the movement to be able to move it around and sew to our other parts. So there's my partial seam. Let me press this. I press it towards the dark. And I think this one I found easier to press if I took it from the top like this. And I'm kind of tugging on this. I want this portion, I want this block that I've just added to move properly. This little patch, I want it to be fully extended, and you press most of the way here. I don't worry too much about pressing this part out because you're going to have to move it and repress it again, so we're not going to worry about that. All right, now, here we go. So I can't add this one yet, it's not ready, but I can add this one, and see, full straight seam there. But that's a lot easier than you thought it was going to be. So now I'm going to flip this over, but I have two things that I am concerned about when I'm putting this section together. Two very important things. I want to make sure I hit that triangle point dead on. I want it to be perfect. And this one here. So when you make a triangle, you get this little stitched X. X marks the spot. You want to stitch right over that X. But here I have a little problem because the X is going to be hidden. I mean, either way I do it, it's going to cover one up. So I have to figure that out. So what I like to do when I'm encountering this, I'll pin over here on this side just so it doesn't move. I'll pin over here on this side, again, just to give it kind of a little bit of stability as I'm moving things around here. Okay. So I've got that, I can see that, that's fine. Now I've pinned this so I know this is pretty close to where it's going to be. Now I'm going to come here and I'm going to see this section, there it is. That's the little point. I want to make sure I stitch right over the top of that. So I'm going to fold it back under here. I can kind of see just where it is. And I've got my finger down there and I'm going to put a little line. See, does that little pink line? You can use whatever marking tool works well for you. I love these guys, but I've also used chalk, I've used water erasable markers, I've used all different kinds of things. Whatever marker you need to get the job done, that's the one you use. I've used a red ballpoint pen. I was working with some fabric, dark green stuff, and that's the only color you could see with it. So I've used those too. All right, so let's stitch here. If you encounter one where the block is the unit on top is much larger than the unit on the bottom, or a little bit larger, so like one is baggy, put the baggy one on the bottom. The feed dogs help pull up any extra stuff. All right, so as I'm getting close here, I'm going to eyeball, I'm going to make sure that I'm on a straight line. I'm on a mission to stitch right over that X, so I line that up as I go. If I have to tweak the seam allowance, right, like pull the top up just a little bit more so it hits it just right, I do that. Don't let anybody tell you you can't do stuff like that. You adjust it, right? It's the front. That's the important thing. How the front looks, that's what we care about. All right, so if I had to veer off, I veer back on. And now I see my little spot. I'm also going to just peek under a little bit. I'm going to kind of feel. Does it feel right? And I think I can feel where it's kind of intersecting. That's another way to do it without having to put 10,000 pins in that spot, is you just put your finger on there and you can feel it, if it's in the right spot or not. And if it's not, stop, fix it. So the shows up the way you want. I have been known to use glue stick if I can't get the points to meet. And there's no shame in that. Okay, so let's press this. And I'm pressing everything towards this little center. Let me get this around here. Make sure it's nice and flat. And if you're encountering some little corners, like here, these seem kind of reluctant to stay flat, you can go back later and press it all from the top, or even spritz it with water and press it again. That's the magic of doing the water and spray starch thing, is that you can go back later and kind of fix it and settle everything out. It works really well. Not that I've had to go back later and fix things. I mean, not at all. All right, so we would continue on and add this next one, and the system works the whole entire way around, like so. Then we would add, you need to add the corners. And I know maybe looking at it, you can't quite, the way I have it laid out, you can't quite think where's that corner gonna go? But remember, our block is on point. We have our corners there, 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 and there. Ta-da! Isn't that cool? I really was happy with how it turned out. So let me put this one on here for you guys so that you can see how I would do that part. I love laying out a block like that. It just kind of comes alive. Okay. So this I want to put right on here, and I want to make sure that it's centered really well. And I want to make sure I stitch over, but I don't lose these points. So here is my trick, because I pressed them down. We're going to have to make some adjustments. I'm going to take this pin, and I'm going to stick it right through that X where I want to stitch. Just kind of right through there. And see, the pin is poking out on the other side. I want to keep the pin straight, I don't want to crook it or anything, keep it straight. And I'm just going to imagine that my marker, my pencil here, is continuing that straight line. So when I stitch now, I can stitch right over that line with confidence that if it's not exactly on that X, it is pretty darn close. Do the same thing over here. Right through that point. Pin's nice and straight. And I make my little line. All right. I'm going to trim off these things because they're just going to kind of be in my way for right now. And the less that's in my way, the better. You know what I'm saying? Okay. Now to get this, I want to make sure that it's going to be in the right spot. So there's a couple things that you can kind of think about. Looking at my board here, if I line it up and I kind of center it on my board, so you see I'm about 1/2 inch in on each side, these ends here, they're about 1/2 inch in. And if I can line this guy up here, you kind of think, and I used the board a lot when I was doing this. You line it up so that I can see it's about the same over each side, and then flip it over. Again, because we are working with bias, we do have a little bit of wiggle room. In fact, not everybody believes me about bias and stuff. But if you see, here we have our piece, right? These are the straight of grain, because I ripped my fabric and I cut it along the grain line. These are the straight of grain. This is the bias. So look at this. Look at how much I can stretch that and distort it. If you are not paying attention, and that's a sad-looking triangle, my friends. and then you're going to have to struggle to try to get it back into shape. So we want to be really respectful of the bias. We want to tell the bias who's boss, but we want to be respectful of it. Okay, I like how that is. I have just about the same amount on each side. I'm going to pin it here before I flip it over. Then I'm just going to double check here. All right. Now when I stitch, I'm just going to stitch right over those lines that I made, and it should be just right on. And we'll see. A little test for teacher, huh? And I'm kind of holding this seam down. I think I'm going to pick up my foot and I'm going to make sure I tuck everything in real nice there. You could use a little stiletto. I like a crochet hook. Crochet hook's one of my go-to tools that I always have. I'm going to pick that up. I'm going to lay that flat. It's not as flat as I want it. Okay. And I think I went right over it. We'll see. All right, since this is light, I'm just going to press it open like so. Trying to keep that real sharp, crisp corner. Look at that. Look at that. Yes. I love it. I love it. I love being able to do this and getting all the sharp points and figuring out the little tricks to make that happen. Awesome. Okay, so that's all you would do. Continue building the block, and then you would add the ones from the outside, and then you're going to get these beautiful double windmill blocks. And you could say, I made those with partial seams. Oh. Okay, so that is the double windmill block. In the next episode, we're going to talk about the peony and forget-me-not block, and I'm also going to have another colorway to show you, which is equally as lovely and beautiful as this one. So be sure to tune in. I've got lots of tips, and I'll see you there. This episode of Dream Big Block of the Month is brought to you by Hoffman Fabrics, made to inspire since 1924.